When I first heard about this case I'm covering today, I expected to delve into a wealth of research, intense amounts of coverage and news reports, but I quickly discovered that was not to be the case. Despite the absolutely bizarre circumstances surrounding the disappearances of children Gage Daniel and Chloie Leverette, this case hasn't really been spoken about all that much, and I just feel like I need to share their stories. Even if that does mean that this will likely be a short episode, I don't care, I want to talk about Chloie and Gage. It's been 12 years since 9-year-old Chloie and 7-year-old Gage disappeared following a house fire at their grandparents' house where they were living at the time. Whilst the remains of both grandparents and both family pets were found in the rubble, the remains of Chloie and Gage were nowhere to be seen, despite experts going through the ash with a fine-tooth comb, like almost quite literally. So is it possible that the children survived the fire, and if so, where did they go? How have they never been seen again? Cheryl Daniel was told that she was never going to be able to have children, so when she fell pregnant for the first time in her mid-30s, she was pretty surprised. Chloe Rihanna Leverette was born on June 23, 2003, and I couldn't really find much information on Chloe's father, just that he passed away before the children disappeared. 2 years after Chloe's birth, almost to the day, her half-brother Christopher Gage Daniel was born on the 29th of June 2005. He was named after his father, Christopher Daniel, but would be known by his middle name of Gage. And these kids didn't exactly have the most stable start in life. Cheryl sadly struggled with substance abuse, drugs and alcohol, and so while she made an effort to recover, the children were sent to live with her parents, so their maternal grandparents. That was their grandmother Molly and step-grandfather Leon McLaren, although Leon was known to everyone as just Bubba. They lived in the 700 block of Kingdom Road in Unionville, Bedford County, Tennessee. And the children were happy, they were thriving, they were having a really good childhood with their grandparents on their grandparents' farm. They had so much land to play on, so many animals, they were just happy. Chloe's been described as a fun-loving girl with a good heart who always wanted to be involved in everything, whilst Gage was apparently just the sweetest little boy. He was very kind and was absolutely devoted to his grandfather Bubba, who he just followed round like a puppy. Gage also had special needs, with his mum Cheryl telling the Unsolved Mysteries podcast episode Lost in the Ashes that Gage suffered with Dandy Walker syndrome, which is a congenital condition where basically the cerebellum in the brain doesn't develop normally in utero. And this can affect a wide variety of things, mostly movement and balance, but it differs in level case by case. Other symptoms of Dandy Walker syndrome include developmental delay, low tone, and hydrocephalus. But I don't really get the impression that this really stopped Gage though. Neighbours say that him and Chloe would play in the grandparents' yard all day, every day. Like I said, Molly and Bubba had a lot of land, a lot of animals. It was just a really fun environment for the kids to grow up in. They also had a dog, a toy poodle, who they loved. I do wish I had a bit more background context to give you, but sadly I don't. That is pretty much all I could find about their lives in the lead up to the disappearances. Which brings us to the 23rd of September 2012. As far as anyone is aware, the day was just like any other for the kids. The neighbours last saw them playing outside as normal around 6:30 p.m. before they were called in for the night. And it has always been assumed that they definitely were in the house on that night. And then in the early hours of the morning, a fire started. By the time the authorities were made aware, the fire was already ripping through the home, and it takes them a number of hours to get it under control. Pretty much the entire house was reduced to ash, and it was just assumed that everyone inside had to have perished, nobody was going to survive this level of fire. Cheryl was made aware of the fire just moments after it started. She was woken up in her own home by family members and she was rushed to the scene. Imagine being a mother standing and watching as not only your childhood home burned to the ground, but also knowing that your parents and your 2 children are likely trapped inside. There is just no words for that level of pain, and Cheryl just had to stand there and watch it happen. The house was a single-level ranch-style home, but it did have a basement, and once the fire had been put out, the authorities went in to find the remains. Like I said, it was pretty clear that no one inside this was going to have survived. It was literally engulfed in flames. Bubba and Molly's bodies were pretty quickly located in the basement of the house. They were found lying side by side, but they wouldn't have been in the basement when the fire first started. The heat of the fire caused the floor to cave in, and so they would have fallen into the basement from their bedroom. Although there was something very strange about this, about how their bodies were found, because like I said, the bodies were found side by side. But Bubba and Molly actually didn't share a bedroom. They had two separate bedrooms that would have been about 20 to 30 feet apart from each other. How their bodies were found next to each other is just one of the many mysteries in this case. Did they maybe rush into each other once the fire started? Maybe, but what about the children? Like, the family members seem to be in no doubt that the first thing Molly and Bubba would have done was to find the children, to try and protect them. But it's never been determined by the authorities whether they were actually dead or alive at the time the fire started. There is a chance they were already dead when the fire took hold. The Bedford County Sheriff at the time, Randall Boyce, said there wasn't a piece of this house left. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. All that was left of that house was a little bit of plastic that dripped from the vinyl eaves. The rest fell into the basement and burned up. Like, I can't even exaggerate to you how massive this fire was. Everything was destroyed. So, as I said, Molly and Bubba were found pretty quickly in the ashes, but there was no sign of the kids' remains. The authorities did discover some small bones that they originally did think were Chloie and Gage's, but testing pretty quickly showed that these were actually the remains of the family pets, a dog, a toy poodle, and a cockatoo. When it became clear that the remains of the children weren't going to be all that easily found, teams of investigators were called in from local, state and national agencies. Like, this was a really big deal, because was there maybe a chance that the children got scared and ran into the local woodland? Were they hiding somewhere just waiting to be found? And with each moment that they weren't found inside the house, the possibility that the children may have escaped the fire became bigger and bigger. So the authorities searched the local area, a search that spanned day and night. They called in cadaver dogs, they had helicopters fitted with infrared cameras, they wasted no time or expense in finding Chloie and Gage. But of course, there was no sign of them outside the house either. Pretty quickly, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation got involved in this search, and they called in the help of a forensic anthropologist and an entire team of his students. This team, literal experts in this field, went through every single inch of this rubble. They looked through all of the ashes. They were looking for even the smallest piece of remains, a tooth, a fragment of bone, just something. There's a special technique that forensic anthropologists use when dealing with a scene like this. You're basically given a certain area to look at, which overlaps with the area of the person next to you. So essentially each area is being looked at and searched twice. And despite this, they found absolutely nothing. Most often in house fires, it's not the actual fire that gets you. Like, you'll usually die of smoke inhalation, of suffocation first, which does feel like a small mercy. But this does often mean that bodies will be found in the places that you expect, by a window or even in bed still. And the children weren't found in any of these places, nor anywhere else. Although I do wonder how they can search these places when the entire house is caved down into the basement. But we're going to trust the experts here. But I do want to take a second here to talk about what happens when human bodies burn in house fires, because we do not just turn to ash. Even when a body is cremated, like experts actively trying to burn a body to ash, the skeleton will survive, and it's then placed in a separate machine which grinds the skeleton to ash. And this machine is something called a cremulator, and researching this I actually think is the first time I've ever learned that. I didn't realise that's actually what happens when you're cremated, that your skeleton goes into a separate second machine and is just essentially pulverised. Like, that's pretty horrific. But they've got to do it because bones do not turn to ash in fire. Cremators burn hot. They burn anywhere from 1400 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit or 760 to 980 degrees Celsius. And house fires generally burn at a much lower temperature. Obviously, it all depends on the fuel source, what items are inside the house, what the house is made from, etc. But I did do a bit of research, and the average temperature of a household fire tends to sit around 600 degrees Celsius or 1112 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously meaning that a human body is not likely to completely burn in a house fire. Like, it would have to be a really unique kind of fire to be hot enough to fully cremate a body. And no experts in this case have pointed towards anything that suggests that this fire was a super hot house fire. There should have been the remains of these children in the house, and as Cheryl has pointed out, how can they find the hollow bones of the bird, which would have been cremated at a much lower temperature, but nothing for either child? The forensic anthropologist team searched for 5 whole days and they found absolutely nothing. They did look into one theory that the grandparents actually held the children close as the house burned around them, with a question as to whether the remains were all just sort of like mixed in together. So they looked into that and there was nothing. Like, the children's remains were not with the grandparents. Cheryl said that she was ecstatic when she first heard there was no sign of her children in that house. The chance they'd been able to escape was something that she held on to for a really, really long time. But it's been 12 years now and Chloe and Gage have still not been found anywhere, which begs the question, if they did escape the fire and they've been alive for that entire time, where on earth are they? We all know that there are some fates worse than death. And it would turn out that the children weren't the only thing missing from the house, because Molly and Bubba's safe has also never been found, which, as you can imagine, has prompted a whole array of theories over the years. Just like how you would expect human remains to be found, a big, thick metal safe, you would also expect that to be found, or at least the melted metal. I didn't do any research into temperatures of melted metal. I assume they would have found it. They looked for it. Most of the theories surrounding this consist of somebody breaking into the house, killing Molly and Bubba, taking the kids and the safe, and then setting the house on fire. Something which has only been exaggerated by the fact that the only thing that's thought to have been inside the safe was the couple's will, in which they were leaving everything to the children. They'd actually only changed their will a couple of months beforehand, putting Chloe and Gage as their main beneficiaries and removing whoever was their beneficiary before that. I would be very intrigued to know who they removed from their will to make this the case, as they would be a clear person of interest, but I can only assume investigators have looked into this and they found nothing of interest. Cheryl and a lot of the family are sure that this fire was arson, and that if it was arson, it had to be somebody known to the family. One of the main points to her theory is the fact that the police told her that the basement door was found open. And this is something which to somebody outside of the family might have seemed completely innocent, completely normal, not something to question at all. But Cheryl is insistent that throughout her entire life, throughout her entire childhood, the last thing that Bubba would do every single night before bed was check that the basement door was closed and locked. He kept all of his tools in the basement, like everything for his livelihood, so he always wanted to make sure that there was this extra layer of protection just in case somebody broke in. But after the fire, the door was found open. I mean, I would assume that a fire wouldn't be able to open a door unless the source of the fire was something very powerful in the basement. And that's another angle that's been looked into very deeply. You see, Molly and Bubba, incredible grandparents as they were also hoarders. The house was said to be absolutely full of crap, which I have no doubt would have fueled the fire quite nicely. But part of their hoarding tendencies came in the form of about 30 propane gas tanks that were found in the basement. Gas tanks which Cheryl said had been there since she was a child, so about 3 decades. Bubba apparently worked in the gas industry, so he would just sometimes turn up with them at home and he would just store them down in the basement, and that is where they remained until this fire. Obviously, these propane gas tanks have been looked into as being the source of this fire, and it was found in investigation that some of them had ruptured and there had been leaking gas, but there was no actual evidence that they were the source of the fire. They may have fueled it, but is that how it started? And even if they were leaking gas, there still would have had to have been some form of ignition, like some form of spark that ignited the gas. Perhaps the fire started elsewhere and the gas tanks just fueled it, but it's not like there was a massive explosion or anything that would have caused increased heat levels enough to cremate a human body fully. And in the end, the propane tanks couldn't be confirmed or denied as being the cause of this fire, and neither could anything else. Like, they've never found out how this fire started, despite every part of the house being sifted through. It's just another mystery to add to the pile. In those first few days, Cheryl was questioned intensely by the police and she was given a polygraph test as well, which she did pass. To this day, she is still searching and fighting for her children, so I am pretty convinced that Cheryl had no part in their disappearances. She was just a grieving, very upset mother. As I mentioned earlier, Chloe's father had passed away, so he wasn't ever really considered a person of interest because he was no longer with us. But Gage's father, Christopher, is still alive, and I can only assume that he was looked into as well. Articles online state that Christopher also doesn't believe the children perished in the fire. Like, Cheryl doesn't believe it, Christopher doesn't believe it, nobody in the family really believes it. But no suspects have ever been established in this case, and the truth is that no one, including the police, know if the fire was a criminal act, if there were any criminal acts at all involved here. Like, nobody knows, were the children abducted? Was this arson? Did somebody steal the safe? No one knows. It is unbelievably frustrating. The police did eventually conclude that the fire was most likely an accident, but even that's not a solid statement. This case remains open to this day, and a criminal element hasn't been ruled out. It hasn't been confirmed, but it hasn't been ruled out. Very intriguingly though, Cheryl has said that in the weeks after the disappearance, somebody was actually going around town tearing down all the missing persons posters, which does not help with her suspicion that somebody took her kids. On the Friday, 5 days after the fire, once it was confirmed that they weren't in the ashes, an Amber Alert was officially issued for Chloe and Gage, and this Amber Alert still stands to this day. There have been multiple reported sightings over the years, but nothing has ever been confirmed. As Cheryl said to the Unsolved Mysteries podcast, there was a sighting in February 2013 that she believes was real. Apparently a lady was eating at a sort of Ma and Pop style restaurant in a small town in Tennessee not far from Unionville, and she saw a young girl that she thought looked a lot like Chloe. This case had obviously been very well advertised throughout the state, especially in the local area. And the woman didn't call the authorities at the time, but she did take multiple photos of this girl. Cheryl has seen these photos and she believes that it was her daughter, saying that she would know her daughter's face anywhere. But this lead has never ended up going anywhere at all, it just was a dead end. Authorities did look into it and they found that the family in question with Chloe, or the Chloe lookalike, had paid in cash and they left no trace behind. That was it. Today, Chloe would be 21 years old, and we do have an age progression photo from NCMEC that depicts her at 19. At the time she disappeared, Chloe was 9 years old, she was 4'8" and 75 pounds. She's a Caucasian female with brown hair and hazel eyes. Gage was 7 when he went missing and he would be 19 today. His latest age progressed photo depicts him at 17. He was 4 foot tall and 50 pounds with brown hair and hazel eyes, just like his sister. Thanks to his Dandy Walker syndrome, he may well have been in need of medical attention at some point over the years, if he is still alive. There has been a lot of speculation and just zero answers in this case, and of course that means there are a lot of theories floating around on the internet, which I will touch on briefly, but with no evidence pointing in any direction at all. This is all just speculation. We've covered the idea already that this could have been arson, that somebody broke into the house and took the children and the safe and then set it on fire with Molly and Bubba still inside. And if that's the case, they've kept the children hidden away for all of these years. Chloe and Gage would now both be adults, and depending on the intent behind the abductions, who knows what kind of situation they could be in. I've seen talk of this potentially being a robbery gone wrong, but that doesn't provide any further answers as to the kids. If this was a robbery and maybe the children ended up dead, why would they take their bodies away from the house when they could just leave the bodies in the house and burn it to the ground, as they clearly did anyway? Robbery makes no sense here. I've also seen talk of this being a murder-suicide by the grandparents, but you would assume that the children's remains would have been found if that was the case. And besides, there is no motive as to why the grandparents would want to hurt Chloe and Gage. By all accounts, everyone was very happy with this arrangement. And if the grandparents were maybe struggling, like finding the children too much, there were other family members who would have had them. Like Cheryl was actively trying to get better. She was fighting to have her children back. Like this wasn't a forever kind of situation. Molly and Bubba were just looking after them for the time being. Despite everything, Cheryl has since fully recovered from her substance abuse, and she works today as a certified recovery specialist, as well as runs an assisted living facility. Cheryl completely turned her life around, and she did it for her children. And she was working on it at the time her children disappeared. Addiction is a truly horrible thing. It takes over your brain and your body. It changes who you are as a person. And being able to recover from that whilst in the midst of terrible grief, losing your children and your parents, just shows incredible strength of character in my eyes. Like, so many other people would just have fallen apart. Like, so many people would have gone deeper into addiction. But Cheryl turned it around. That is amazing. When you look online about this case, you'll see lots of people talking about how the obvious answer here is that the children died in the fire, that children's bones apparently aren't as dense as adults and therefore they burn at lower temperatures. And I did try and do some research into this, and whilst I found that that may be the case for like babies, like infants, Chloe and Gage were 7 and 9 years old. I found nothing online to suggest that their remains shouldn't have been found in this fire. And besides, we have got a whole team of expert forensic anthropologists working on this case. Sometimes you've just got to trust the experts, as I've said multiple times in this episode. I am pretty sure that if there was information out there that children's remains burn completely in house fires, they would have known that. I doubt they would have spent so much time and energy sifting through every inch of this house if the research suggested that there wouldn't be any remains to be found. Like, I'm pretty sure if anybody's going to know what happens to children's remains in fires, they're the people who are going to know. And besides, if children's remains apparently burn at lower temperatures than adults, would that not suggest that children's remains would never be found in house fires? Because they generally are. Like, in 99.99999% of cases, children's remains are found in houses alongside adults. Like, they don't just burn up. This case bears a lot of similarities to the case of the Sodder children, whose home was destroyed in a fire on Christmas Eve 1945. Living in the home at the time were George and Jenny Sodder and 9 of their 10 children. When the fire took hold, George and Jenny were able to escape along with 4 of their children, but the bodies of the remaining 5 weren't found in the remains, nor were they found anywhere else. Just like Cheryl, George and Jenny always suspected arson in this case, and they always believed that their children survived the fire. But almost 79 years on, we still don't have answers in that case. I actually covered this case of the Sodder children on my channel about 5 years ago, so I'll link it down below in case anyone is interested in watching a very, very similar story. It really is like eerily similar, with accusations of arson and cover-ups and all sorts. But as it stands, that's all I have for you in the case of Chloe Leverette and Gage Daniel. This is truly a case with no evidence, no leads, not even any confirmation that a criminal act has taken place. But their family, Cheryl, still deserves some answers. They deserve peace. Living in that in-between place must feel like purgatory. Like, you feel guilty if you move on, but you're consumed by the want for answers. And they deserve those answers. They need to know what happened to their children. Obviously, if Chloe and Gage did perish in the fire and it was indeed an accident, then there's not really going to be any information that anyone can share that's going to provide answers. But if the fire was an arson, if they did manage to escape, if they were abducted, then somebody out there knows what's going on. And so Cheryl was just hoping that that person comes forward. This case is truly a dead end. Like, there is nothing more really that detectives can do here, so it really is just relying on the public, relying on somebody with some answers. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you like what I'm doing here on my channel, then please do not forget to show your support in any way you can to let YouTube know that my videos are probably worth watching and they should push them out to more people. The easiest way to do that is just by giving it a thumbs up, or you can leave a comment down below, or you can even subscribe to my channel. I see a lot of you who come back every week and watch my videos, and I can see that you're not subscribing. Just click it and then I'll pop up for you and you won't have to go and search, and it'll just be all easier. I'll see you all next week. Bye, guys.